Alright, so now that I've demoed the game, I will go into depth on how it was actually made within this engine, and it will start to open up on how it actually work inside this thing. So I've basically created a game manager, a level manager, wave manager. So those control the actual structure for the game, so the win conditions, lose conditions, etc., specifically in the game manager. And these control, which wave the player's on, which communicates with the level manager, telling it, this we're at this wave. Now, once we've hit this wave, switch to this level, and then once the level manager's like, okay, so we're finished with all the waves and all the levels. Now, we've won the game. And if the player dies, which is also tracked by the level manager, game over. These are the 3 playable scenes. Naming conventions could use some work, but there is the title, win, and game over. These are some assets within the scenes. So every scene will have, enemies, player as well, except for the title, win, and game over scenes. Then there's the tank manager, which actually creates the tanks, controlled by the level manager. And then the wave manager actually creates the waves, which send data over to the level manager to create them. These wave delays and level delays, they're just alarmable objects that run, and then they signal like, now we do what we're supposed to. So it just creates a nice delay for the player. So it's not an immediate switch to the next level or next wave. So enemies have a tank type and enemy data. So that basically says, what color tank am I, what's my action, etc. And that's all. That happens when they're initialized, and then there's an enemy FSM controlling it. I'll go into the FSM a little bit. They each have states. There are a lot of those. When I say a lot, where is it? Enemy FSM states a lot. All right. So without further to continue, so player tank has a HUD, and then there's the settings menu and pause menu in each scene of these scenes specifically. Pausing is disabled on these scenes. You can make that so there's the settings and pause menu, and they just show up and do their thing. Settings are for actually changing the volume. Health pickups, those can be added based on what the user says, or the user being the developer. And then there's the trees, there's the tree and then the tree leaves, which are pretty much the same object. Use the tree leaves, and that's just a different texture lined up with the tree, just scaled a little bit smaller. That turns down with the tree, and once you hit it, that's how you can remove the leaves from the tree. And then later on like the canyon and then the third level, there are no leaves on the trees because it just doesn't fit the aesthetic. But on the first one, it fits the aesthetic, and it really opens up the user to, they're actually making an impact on the level, not just destroying tanks. Anyway, so let's get into exactly how this is done. So I want to go into the state machine first. So this is the enemy state. It basically just has these functions, and it's the same for each one of them. The enemy FSM, it's just holds static const objects, and is called on by the enemy tank itself. So the enemy tank here, it has look at, follow, random. That was a previous enemy behavior that it can just be set for a default. It's nice to have, but it's not used the same anymore. So it has collisions with players, enemy tanks, bullets, and trees. It has this a basic game object. The only difference between this and the player tank, actually, so here's the tank base. It's updatable, alarmable, drawable, and collidable. The only difference between that and the player tank is that the player tank is inputable. So the enemy tank, how we actually create it, I'll just show you that function. It's a little bit down. It is right here. So when we actually initialize the enemy, it sets it to orange, red, yellow, or magenta, passed in by wave data. So wave data is right here. And I made this file specifically so a designer could look at it, and if they know a bit of code, they can say, okay, this is how we set it up. Obviously, with a little bit of instructions, it would be preferable to have a parsed text file, but I figured, just for this specific case, it could be something that's actually pretty usable. And you can set the offset of where you want the enemies to spawn, just a general area. So if it's this case, it spawns them randomly and then sets the Z offset by like 500, and the max range they're allowed to spawn in X and Z wise is 1500. So in either direction. So now how the scenes are set up. Let's get into that. So the tanks they're set up and everything. Actually, you know what? Let me go into the game manager first before we go into the scenes. I'll actually discuss scenes in the next video. So the game manager, it has a pause state. It controls pausing, and it is a singleton. And what it does is when we set the game state, we set it to either title, in-game, game over, game one, paused, unpaused. So it basically, it tells the level manager next level if it's in. So the level manager actually starts off looking like this. Player has a certain amount of lives, and this is 3, so it's less than or equal to 0 in this case. So we have this is the structure. I don't want to delve into it; it'll take too long. But it controls pausing, sets pausing enabled and pausing disabled as well. Controls the tanks on screen. It communicates with the tank manager to control the tanks on the screen. I should specify. Keeps track of the player's lives and death and the wave that it's on as well. Meanwhile, the wave manager actually just manages how it creates the waves. Wave manager looking something like this. And that's reset. I do this right here so that we can reset whenever we hit the title scene or something like that. Whenever we create this instance for the first time, actually. So now I want to get into the scenes, and I will do that in this next video coming up.